The auction block had emptied hours ago, leaving only scattered credits and the metallic taste of desperation in the recycled air. Every captive had been claimed, bartered, or branded, all except one. The final figure huddled in the corner cage drew no bids, sparked no interest. When the gavel fell for the last time, she remained. Dust motes danced through artificial light as Kai Brennan pulled his thermal jacket tighter. The mining station's corridors echoed with the hollow sound of his footsteps, each one a reminder of how alone he'd become on this forgotten asteroid. He wasn't here for the trading, told himself, that lie 3 times before the warehouse came into view. The converted docking bay still hummed with leftover energy from the day's transactions. Stacked crates, heated lamps, and security drones created a maze of shadows. Most buyers had departed with their acquisitions, leaving behind only empty restraints and the lingering scent of fear. She sat motionless in the furthest enclosure, knees drawn tight, arms wrapped around herself like armor. Her hair fell in waves of deep amber, catching what little light filtered through the grimy ceiling panels. Her skin held an otherworldly pallor not quite human, touched with silver undertones that seemed to absorb rather than reflect illumination. Approached slowly, boots scraping against metal flooring. She didn't acknowledge his presence, didn't track his movement. Her stillness wasn't sleep. It was withdrawal, the kind that came from surviving too much. "They forgot about you?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. Nothing, not even a flutter of recognition. Up close, she appeared carved from moonlight and sorrow. Her face angled away, eyes sealed shut as if she could will herself invisible. The only sign of life was the faint mist of her breath against the enclosure's inner surface. Kai reached through the bars, fingertips barely grazing hers. Ice cold, no response. Then, barely perceptible, her hand twitched. Not pulling away, but acknowledging. Something stirred beneath the careful emptiness. "She's surplus now," a voice called from behind. One of the dealers, respirator hanging loose around his neck. His partner chewed synthetic tobacco like it owed him money. "She was part of the lot?" Kai asked, not turning from the cage. "First hour." Wouldn't speak, wouldn't respond. "0 bids." The man shrugged. "Hybrid from the outer colonies. Some kind of sensory mutation. Figured she was brain damaged." "What classification?" "Enhanced human crossbreed," the second dealer spat. "Temple-born from the spiral systems. Thought she was too good for interaction. Might be neurologically compromised." The first man wiped his hands on a stained cloth. "You want her, take her. No charge. We were gonna dump her with the other waste anyway." Kai moved to the nearby terminal. The biometric scanner flared green under his palm. A single line appeared on the transfer document. Unclaimed unit, unsuitable for labor designation. He signed. Without hesitation. Minutes later, the enclosure hissed open. Cold air spilled out like a held breath finally released. Kai stepped inside, removing his jacket and wrapping it around her shoulders with deliberate care. She weighed almost nothing, malnourished. Fragile as spun-glass. As he lifted her, her eyelids fluttered. Not awakening, but something deeper stirring. Like consciousness testing whether it was safe to return. The dealers laughed behind them. "You'll regret this, stranger. Broken ones never heal." Kai didn't respond. Outside, wind carved through the station's external corridors, carrying ice crystals that stung like accusations. He adjusted his grip, pulling her closer against the cold. She didn't resist, but her fingers curled slightly against his shirt, the first voluntary movement she'd made. His dwelling perched on the asteroid's rim, accessible through a network of maintenance tunnels and emergency passages. A single room. Habitat fed by geothermal taps, it had been home for 3 years now. Long enough to forget what warmth felt like. Long enough to remember why he'd come here. Heat embraced them as they entered. The environmental controls still functioned barely. He carried her to the thermal bench beside the heating unit and laid her down gently. Then he knelt, carefully removing what remained of her tattered clothing, wrapping her in insulated blankets, checking her pulse, her breathing. Her skin was cold but not dangerously so. Her heartbeat shallow but steady. Bruises marked her collarbone, her wrists not fresh, not healed. Evidence of careful handling by those who saw her as inventory. He prepared nutrient broth. Nothing elaborate synthetic proteins and electrolytes heated until steam rose from the surface. When he brought it to her lips, she didn't move. He touched. The cup's rim to her mouth. A drop landed on her lower lip. She twitched. Confusion flickered across her features. Then she opened her mouth and drank in trembling, hesitant sips. Too fast, she choked. He steadied her, waited, let her try again. When she finished, her eyes remained closed, but her body eased fractionally. A muscle in her jaw unclenched. A single tear tracked down her cheek and crystallized there. Kai sat back, watching steam rise from the empty cup. He didn't speak again, but in that quiet space, with the wind testing the habitat seals like probing fingers, something fundamental had shifted. She wasn't gone. He wasn't alone. Not anymore. The habitat carried the scent of heated metal and thawed fabric, like the moment after a storm when breath becomes visible not from cold but from relief. Kai sealed the airlock against the wind's protests and stood motionless, listening to the subtle adjustments of pressurization. His boots left damp prints on the floor, steam rising faintly in the recycled warmth. The woman lay where he'd left. Her, wrapped in thermal layers, illuminated by the amber glow of the emergency lighting. Still as carved ice, her amber hair spilled over the bench's edge, tips damp with melting frost. She hadn't shifted, hadn't made a sound, but something had changed. The quality of her stillness was different, less like unconsciousness, more like chosen rest. Kai noticed the cup first. He'd left it beside her. Now it sat clean and empty on the room's single shelf. She'd moved it there herself, quietly, without asking. That simple action meant more than any conversation. He adjusted the heating unit, coaxing more warmth from the geothermal feed. The system responded with a gentle hum, warm air circulating through floor vents with a sound like contentment. Outside, wind had softened to a whisper, though ice still rattled against the viewports like someone seeking entry. She didn't track his movement, but her breathing had changed, deeper, slower, less about survival, more about rest. He watched her for a moment longer, then moved to the small kitchen area. The water heater surged as he prepared a fresh basin, steam rising as heated liquid met the cold air. He returned with a soft cloth, approaching slowly. She didn't resist as he gently touched her forehead with the damp fabric. Didn't flinch, but her fingers shifted beneath the blanket, responding to the contrast of warmth against chilled skin. Just cleaning the frost, he murmured. No harm intended. No words in return, but no withdrawal either. He worked carefully, wiping away ice crystals from her cheeks, the delicate line of her jaw, the curve behind her ear. Her skin was cold but warming, no signs of severe exposure. Just exhaustion that went deeper than physical fatigue. When he reached for her hand, she tensed. Not fear, not pulling away, uncertainty. As if her body had learned to expect pain from even gentle contact. He paused, laying the cloth aside, simply holding her hand between his, letting her feel the difference. No pressure, no demand. Just human warmth, steady and patient. Minutes passed. Then, with the softest whisper of movement, her fingers relaxed. Her palms settled against his, still cool but no longer resisting. Kai exhaled slowly, unaware he'd been holding his breath. I won't hurt you, he said. I don't know if you understand, but maybe you can sense intention." She gave no reply, but her head tilted slightly toward his voice. "Perhaps. Maybe." He released her hand gently and stood, stretching until his spine cracked. Outside, wind slapped against the habitat once more, reminding him the solar collectors would ice over if left unattended. He couldn't afford a power failure, not now. "Need to check the panels," he said aloud, partly for her benefit. 15 minutes, maybe 20. "You're safe here. Door locked, heat steady." No response, but when he moved toward the airlock, her fingers shifted again, a fractional movement, a barely perceptible adjustment of the blanket. She wasn't asleep, she was aware. That mattered. He suited up thermal gear, face protection, insulated gloves, and stepped into the pale light of the asteroid's artificial day. The sky above was the color of old pewter, lit by the distant glow of the system's primary star and the reflected light of nearby planetoids. The collectors were half buried again. He cleared them with practiced efficiency, mechanical motions, drilled into muscle memory from months of routine. The array hummed and stabilized as ice fell away. He checked the intake filters, verified the charge levels. Then he paused, hands still resting on the solar framework, and let the thin wind press against him. Why had he brought her here? He wasn't a good man. Not anymore. Not since the accident. Not since the collapse. Everyone back on the core worlds had called it a tragic malfunction, a senseless industrial failure. But the part he never spoke of, the part that still woke him in the deep cycle hours, was that he'd been there when it happened. And he'd survived when others hadn't. Maybe this was compensation. Maybe desperation. He pushed the thought away and headed back down the path, boots finding familiar grooves in the asteroid's artificial surface. The habitat was warm when he returned. The ember light still glowed softly, the scent of heated metal and mineral tea, lingering in the recycled air. She hadn't moved, but the blanket had shifted as if she'd drawn it closer, not from cold, but for comfort, and the cup remained on the shelf, clean and waiting. But her hands now rested palm up atop the covering. No longer hidden, no longer defensive. He removed his gear, shaking off ice crystals, and crouched beside her again. "Back," he said softly. "Everything's stable." No reply. Then, so faint he thought he'd imagined it, she exhaled not just breath but release. Tension uncoiling by the smallest degree. He stayed there in the quiet, letting her adjust, letting himself adjust too. And then, as he reached to dim the emergency lighting, she spoke. One word, "Why?" He froze. Her voice was barely audible, soft and strangely accented, shaped like wind through crystal formations, but unmistakably clear, deliberate. He turned back slowly. Her eyes were open pale blue, clouded but not blind. Distant, focused not directly on him but on the space he occupied. She didn't repeat the question. She didn't need to. He sat beside her on the floor, elbows on his knees. "I saw you there. Everyone else, they were claimed, purchased, taken. You were left behind like refuse." She said nothing. Her expression didn't change, but her fingers shifted again. He continued. "Maybe. I don't know why. Maybe I just couldn't tolerate the idea of walking away." That earned him the faintest crease between her brows. Almost skepticism, or perhaps understanding. She blinked slowly. Then her eyes closed again, and this time she chose to sleep. Not collapse from exhaustion or shock. She decided to rest. And Kai remained exactly where he was, watching her chest rise and fall until the heating unit cycled on with a gentle whisper, and the habitat settled around them both. Wind had died during the sleep cycle. Not the usual storm-stilled quiet that hinted at worse weather coming, but something softer. Expectant. Kai sat near the heating unit, knees drawn up, arms resting loosely across them. The geothermal feed had finally penetrated the habitat's core. Structure. He could feel warmth in his hands again, in the small of his back, in his breath. Across from him, Lyra slept, not the strained, shallow breathing of a body conserving energy, but the deeper rhythm of genuine rest. Her chest rose and fell in time with the habitat's subtle vibrations. She hadn't cried out, hadn't started during the night. She had simply remained. He didn't disturb her. He sat and listened to the space around them, its tension slowly dissolving. When she stirred, it wasn't sudden. Her fingers moved first, curling around the blanket's edge. Then her eyes opened pale and luminous, alert but cautious. She scanned the room not with direct sight but in layers, reading the environment with senses beyond vision. He waited, giving her that first moment without pressure. Eventually she sat up, the blanket pooling in her lap. "Good morning," he offered. Gently. Her gaze didn't land directly on him but somewhere near his voice. "I thought I had died," she said. "You didn't," he replied. "You're here." A beat passed. "Why do you live in a place like this?" The question hung between them, not accusation but genuine curiosity. Kai stood and moved to the small heating unit, pouring warm tea into 2 metal cups. "I used to live in a place with noise, color, crowds," he said. "Then I lost people. After that, I lost my way. So I came here somewhere no one would ask me what I used to be." He handed her a cup. She took it with both hands, holding it just below her face, absorbing the steam as much as the liquid. "Does it work?" she asked quietly. "Some days." She sipped slowly, carefully. The silence between them softened out after several minutes. Lara stood. Kai tensed instinctively but didn't move. He watched as she walked the room's perimeter without speaking, her steps soundless and deliberate. Her fingers traced the walls, the worn table, the carved bench. She paused near the shelf where his sculptures rested, half-formed attempts, long-finished pieces. She reached out and brushed the edge of one, an abstract cube twisted more by grief than skill. Her brow creased. "This one resonates incorrectly." He smiled faintly. "That was the first thing I tried to carve after the collapse. I think it's a little broken." "No," she said, turning toward him, "not broken. Just unfinished." Her hair caught the amber light like captured fire. "Like you." He opened his mouth, then closed it. She continued exploring, pausing near the storage locker where he kept his emergency supplies, weatherproof pack, essential tools, ration bars, backup power cells. She ran her hand along the container seal and glanced toward him. "You were ready to leave?" "No," he said. "I was ready to survive." She nodded, then did something unexpected. She knelt beside the locker, opened it slowly, and removed 1 ration bar. She peeled the wrapper, broke it in half, and held out a piece to him. He took it. They sat cross-legged on the floor and ate in silence. The taste wasn't pleasant, but it was warm and filled the hollow spaces inside them with something that wasn't. Fear. "I don't remember the last time I ate with someone," she said. "Me either." She paused, her voice dropping smaller. "My kind, we don't eat before those we don't trust. The mouth is sacred, vulnerable." He blinked. "And yet here we are." She gave a breath of laughter. It wasn't full or free, but it was real. "You said you lost people. Who were they?" He stared into the heating unit's glow. 3 apprentices. Young, talented, probably better than I was. I was supposed to be teaching them, but the foundry collapsed. Structural failure. I got out. They didn't. Her eyes didn't flinch. "You tried." He nodded. The support beam gave way. "By the time I got back with help, the whole facility was gone. And you blamed yourself." Every day. They sat quietly again. Then Lyra spoke, voice like smoke. "I once carved a memory crystal for a mother who'd lost her child. She asked me to capture his last words in the lattice. Did it work? I don't know. She said it did, but I couldn't perceive them myself, only feel the grief vibrating through the structure. He met her gaze. Can you still do that? Sometimes, but I haven't tried since the sedation. I'm not the same. No one ever is after trauma, he said. But maybe that's what gives us definition. She tilted her head, like stone. Exactly. That night, they didn't sit across the room from each other. They worked side by side on fresh clay simple material. This time, Lyra pressed her hands into it first. Kai guided from behind, showing her how to shape without breaking, how to find tension lines, how to coax form from formlessness. Their hands touched more than once. Neither flinched. By the end of the sleep cycle, the clay held the first echo of something new, a curve, a gesture, a form neither could name yet, but one that had weight. When they lay down to rest, Lyra didn't curl away. She faced him, not close enough to touch, but close enough to feel the space shrinking between them. And for the first time, the habitat didn't feel like a shelter. It felt like a beginning. Mornings came slower now. Not because of the cold, it remained as unforgiving as ever, but because neither of them hurried anymore. There was a rhythm forming between them, not in words but in movement, in shared warmth, in the way they carved time into something tangible. Lyra woke before Kai. She'd begun rising early, stepping barefoot onto the heated floor panels and slipping into the workspace before the first tea finished brewing. She never explained why. Maybe she didn't know herself. Today was the same. The gray-blue light of the asteroid's artificial dawn filtered through frost-laced viewports as she crouched in the studio space, studying a block of stone that refused to speak. Her hands hovered above it, trembling faintly as if trying to read something written deep within the mineral structure. She reached for a chisel. Her grip was unsteady. Kai's voice came from behind her, warm but tentative. Starting something new? No, she said, not turning. Trying to finish something old. She pressed the chisel's tip to the stone's edge and paused. The tool shook in her hand. He crossed the room slowly, crouching nearby without invading her space. Do you want help? She hesitated, then shook her head. I want to feel what I used to. Her hand moved. The chisel struck too hard. Stone split, not cleanly, not elegantly. A ragged fracture snaked across the surface, destroying the shape before it could form. Lyra froze. Kai waited. She didn't move, didn't breathe. Then abruptly she stood and hurled the tool across the room. It struck the far wall with a clatter that echoed like a scream. I can't do it, she whispered. Lyra, I can't do it, she said again, louder this time. I hear nothing. I feel nothing. It's all hollow. She backed away from the ruined stone, shoulders heaving. Do you understand what they took from me? I wasn't just trained to shape stone, I was the stone. The temple spoke through me. And now there's only silence. He didn't try to speak. Not yet. I carved for the dead, she said, her voice cracking. For the wounded, for those who couldn't carry their grief anymore. And now I can't even make a line without shattering it. Her knees gave out. She sank to the floor, arms wrapped tight around herself. Kai crossed the room and sat beside her. He didn't speak, didn't touch her. He just waited until her breathing slowed, until the trembling passed, until her silence softened from panic into exhaustion. Then he said gently, I didn't touch stone for 2 years. She looked at him. I tried once, he continued. The week after the collapse, my hand slipped. I cut straight through the sculpture's core. After that, I packed up every chisel, every file, every scrap of clay. Why? She asked. Because I thought creation should come from peace, and I didn't have any. He paused. Now I know it doesn't. It comes from pain, from memory, from choosing to shape it anyway. Lyra stared at the cracked stone in front of her. I want to believe that. You don't have to. Just start with trying again. A long silence passed. Then she shifted closer to him, leaned slightly not into him but toward him, as if gravity had changed. I feel ashamed, she whispered. So did I. I feel broken, I know, and you're still here. He nodded. Because broken things don't stay that way, not if they're held. Her eyes shimmered not from tears but from something deeper. Recognition. Resonance. Slowly she turned toward him and laid her forehead gently against his shoulder. He let her. They sat there until the heating unit dimmed and the wind picked up again outside. Later that evening, Lyra stood before the same slab she'd fractured. She hadn't discarded it. She'd placed it upright again, gently, like a wounded limb. Reset in its socket. Kai watched from the workbench. Sipping bitter tea, she picked up a smaller chisel, not the heavy one from before. This one fit more naturally in her grip. She pressed its edge to the fracture line and began tracing it. Not to erase the damage, but to follow it. He rose and stepped beside her. Want to work on it together? She didn't answer with words. She simply moved slightly to the left and made space for him beside her. They worked in silence, chisels moving in synchronization, each echoing the other's motion. The crack became a line. The line became a curve. The curve became something beautiful, not because it was smooth, but because it told the truth. Later, as they sat by the heating unit, Kai asked, "What was your name before you were taken?" She shook her head. "We didn't have names the way you do. We were echoes, resonances of the ones before. And now?" She turned to him, eyes bright in the flickering light. "Now I am Lyra because you asked." His chest ached at the quiet gravity of that sentence. He reached out and touched her hand gently, not to lead, not to take, but to stay. And this time, she laced her fingers through his without hesitation. The asteroid was too still. Outside, artificial weather had paused its cycle. No wind whispered against the viewports. No structural creaks came from the mining platform that held their habitat like a jewel in a giant's palm. Even the heating unit seemed to hum more quietly, as if the recycled air itself had learned to hold its breath. Lyra noticed it first. She sat cross-legged beside their finished sculpture, one hand pressed gently against its surface, eyes closed, not listening with her ears but with her entire being. She turned toward Kai without speaking. He read the tension in her shoulders, the strain beneath her breath. "Someone's approaching," she whispered. He didn't question how she knew. He trusted her now, just as she'd begun to trust him. He stood quickly, quietly, pulling his jacket down from the hook near the airlock. The plasma rifle, an old military-grade model, hung beside it. He hadn't touched it in weeks. He strapped it across his shoulder. "You stay inside." Lyra rose, eyes steady. "I won't hide." "You're not hiding. You're surviving." "I didn't return to life to be shelved again." He stared at her for a long moment, then nodded once and handed her the resonance amplifier from his belt, a carved handle with a crystal tip. She could channel sound through it if needed, not as a weapon, but as a warning. "If it gets dangerous," he said, "you make the whole platform scream." She nodded, lips pressed in a line of cold resolve. He opened the outer hatch. The air was thinner than it had been, sharp and brittle like it had been carved from glass. Down the slope, 3 figures approached. Not fast, not stealthy, deliberate. The first he recognized, the scarred man from the auction, crooked smile. Intact. This time he wasn't alone. 2 others flanked him, one broad-shouldered and armored, the other with long-range tools strapped to her back. Not soldiers, freelancers. EXTRACTORS. Kai stepped out, boots crunching through the crust of artificial snow. The rifle remained slung across his back. "You made a mistake," the scarred man called out. Should have handed her over when you had the chance. She's not yours to take. She was purchased property. She's a person, Kai said, louder now. And she's under my protection, the extractor woman chuckled. You think that means something way out here? I think it means enough. Step aside, the large one growled. We've got a buyer waiting, high-tier collector. Rare sensory-enhanced specimens go for a fortune now. You don't even know what she is. Don't need to. She resonates. That's all they care about. Behind him, a low vibration shook the ground, subtle but growing. They all felt it. Lyra stood in the doorway, her hand gripping the amplifier, her face a mask of calm fury. Around her, the artificial snow shifted not from wind but from sound. The stones beneath the habitat moaned with old memory. She's doing that? The woman hissed. Yes, Kai said. And you should leave before she decides to do more. But the scarred man didn't flinch. He stepped forward. You really think I'm afraid of a broken temple foundling and a washed-up sculptor? Kai's finger twitched toward his rifle strap, but then Lyra stepped forward, too barefoot on the snow, skin glowing faintly in the low light. Her voice was quiet, but every syllable landed like a dropped stone. I'm not broken. She raised the amplifier and tapped it against the snow. The platform answered, not with violence, not with collapse, but with warning. The ridge above them groaned. Snow loosened. Rocks trembled in place. I carved death songs once, she said. I know how to make a mountain mourn. Wind returned, howling around the platform like it had just remembered its purpose. The three strangers froze, heads jerking toward the sound above them. You don't want to see what happens when I grieve. The first man sneered, but his hand was trembling now. His confidence had cracked. Fine, he spat. Keep your pet. She's more trouble than she's worth. He turned, boots grinding into the slope, and the others followed. They didn't run, but they didn't look back either. Lyra stood motionless until the last echo of their steps vanished. Only then did she lower the amplifier. Her knees buckled. Kai was beside her in an instant, catching her before she hit the ice. Her skin was ice cold, her breathing ragged. You were trembling, he whispered. So were they, she replied faintly, smiling. He carried her inside not because she was weak, but because she'd used every last ember of strength to become more than what they tried to reduce her to. He laid her near the heating unit, wrapped in thick blankets. She didn't speak. Her eyes closed, but her fingers reached out, finding his. She didn't let go. Neither did he. The storm had passed again, but cold lingered. It seeped through the habitat seals and into the cracks between floor panels. Outside, wind rested, but the snow spoke in whispers as it shifted against the structure's joints. Inside, warmth held barely. Kai stirred the coals in the small heating unit, the metal rod clicking against stone. The fire was smaller than usual. Fuel reserves had thinned since the last power surge damaged the solar heating array. He hadn't told Lyra yet. He would when the sun returned, when the timing didn't feel like defeat. She sat across from him, legs tucked beneath a thick thermal blanket, her eyes fixed not on the heating unit but on the half-carved stone block between them. The sculpture had no definite shape, yet only suggestion. A curve of motion in the center, a slow rise of texture on one side. It looked like breath arrested halfway. She reached out and touched the edge. Her hand was steady but slow, listening, reading what hadn't been written. Her voice, when it came, was quiet, factual. You haven't carved since they came. He didn't answer immediately, not because he didn't want to, but because he wasn't sure how to articulate it. They came for what I protect, he said finally. That changes how my hands feel. She nodded once, fingertips still on stone. I understand. Silence stretched between them, not the brittle kind, but the thick one, full of unspoken things. I was afraid, she said. He looked up. Her face was tilted slightly toward the heating unit now, eyes catching flecks of amber. Of them? He asked. Of what I'd become. Of using that sound again, she paused. You stopped them, but I used what I was trained for as a weapon. A temple resonant should never turn harmonic energy into harm. You didn't harm, he said. You. Warned. Her eyes flicked to his. For once they held. I still feel it, she whispered, the power of it. Like heat I can't put down. He reached across the floor and laid his hand beside hers, not touching, but close. Fire isn't evil, he said. It only burns when it's not contained, but it also warms, it lights, it shapes. She looked at him. The room felt smaller, not in space but in distance. Outside, snow pressed against the walls. Inside, the heating. Unit crackled softly, light flickering over them, tracing lines of fatigue and tension that hadn't yet eased. Lyra moved her hand slightly. Her fingers brushed his, not accidental, not urgent. Just their dot. His breathing slowed. She turned her palm to meet his. Their hands aligned, skin against skin, not clasped, not gripping, just parallel. Like two halves of something that finally understood where it belonged. I haven't slept, she said. You haven't rested. She gave a breath of agreement, then looked down at their hands. I don't know how to fall asleep when I'm not afraid. You could try beside me. She didn't move for a moment. Then she stood silently and crossed to the sleeping area. She sat first, waited. He followed. They lay side by side, fully clothed, bodies a respectful space apart at first. Then the heating unit dipped lower and she shifted closer just enough that her forehead brushed his shoulder. Her hand found his beneath the blanket. Her leg, half bent, rested lightly against his thigh. He didn't move, didn't speak. He just stayed, and she exhaled slow and uneven, a sigh she hadn't released in years. Her voice broke the silence, fragile. If I sleep now, will you still be here when I wake? He turned his head, forehead against hers. Yes. Nothing more needed saying. He closed his eyes, and so did she, not because she trusted the world, but because for once she trusted him. And in that habitat, buried in artificial snow and silence, two scarred people finally rested. Not in separate corners, not as guest and host, but as something unnamed and becoming. The heating unit smoldered low and warm, and for the first time, Lyra dreamed without chains. The asteroid was quiet again. Snow had drifted high overnight, swallowing the lower sections of the habitat's exterior walls. Cold pressed in from every seal, not violent but insistent. Kai stirred the heating unit carefully, stacking the last of their combustible fuel. Sparks lifted like breath from the chamber. Lyra stood by the airlock, still listening. I can't sense them anymore, she said, her voice low but certain. He glanced up. You're sure? She nodded once. They're gone. The scavengers hadn't returned. No footprints, no resonance signatures. Only clean silence, the kind that followed endings. Still, they'd prepared. The sculpture by the door, originally a symbol, was now a barrier reinforced, anchored. She'd shaped its lower curve to distribute pressure from outside. He'd weighted it with metal cores and layered stone. A monument and a defense. Kai exhaled slowly, rubbed the tension from his neck, then crossed to the small viewport. Outside, light crept slowly across the snowfields, casting long shadows over the frozen ridge. The sun never truly rose on this asteroid, but it stretched low like a dying ember and gave just enough warmth to remind you it existed. He turned back to find Lyra watching him, not studying, not waiting, just present. He met her gaze, then crossed to the work table. Their tools lay where they'd left them, chisels, carving rods, resonance picks. The clay-bound heart of their next piece still waited, wrapped in protective cloth. Lyra followed him. She pulled away the cloth, revealing the beginnings of a new sculpture, no clear form yet, just suggestion, motion. A spiral caught mid-turn, anchored by two figures leaning together in tension. Not finished, but alive. She pressed her hand to its surface and winced. Kai noticed. Pain? She hesitated, then nodded. Some of the nerve pathways never healed properly. He took her hand in both of his. Her fingers were cold, skin pale. We can stop. No, she said. I don't want to stop. I just want to adjust. She moved to the opposite side of the slab, adjusted the angle of her chisel, and let him guide the stone with her. Not leading, not teaching, just moving in rhythm. The sound of shaping filled the habitat again. Not the violence of construction, not the chaos of collapse. Just creation measured, focused. Lyra worked longer than she usually did, her movements slower now, grounded. When she paused, she wiped her hands against her jacket and stepped to the viewport. Outside, the snow was pristine. No scars, no tracks. She opened the hatch slightly. Cold rushed in, but not like before, not slicing. Just real. She stepped onto the platform. Kai joined her, wrapping a thermal blanket around her shoulders before stepping out himself. They stood in the silence together, shoulder to shoulder. Below them, the world looked untouched, but they knew better. Buried under that ice were Echo's battles. Fought not with blood, but with choice. She leaned her head against his arm. I was going to die here, she said. I was ready. He didn't interrupt, but you didn't let me stay forgotten. You didn't let yourself, he said. She looked up at him, her breath curling in the air between them. Would you ever go back? She asked. To the core worlds? He thought for a moment. I don't think it's home anymore, he said. I think it stopped being that a long time ago. He turned to her fully. And now it's wherever you are. She held his gaze, then silently she leaned up and kissed him. Not with urgency, not with fear, but with certainty. When they parted, neither of them looked away. Inside, the heating unit had dipped low again. Lyra stepped back toward the habitat and looked over her shoulder. I want to finish the piece, she said, then build something new. He followed her inside. They worked side by side until the light dimmed again. Final sculpture took shape by the door, a pair of broken forms interlocked, one curved like a flame, the other like a wave. Different, but fused by weight and intent. It stood in silence, but it said everything. And as the next storm curled low over the horizon, Kai and Lyra didn't reach for weapons. They reached for each other, warmth held. The heating unit rose again, and the snow outside fell without fear. They had built something the wind couldn't erase, something that still stood. The sun wasn't truly out, but light was stronger today, thin and golden, sliding across the snow in long honey-colored ribbons. Wind had taken the day off. The sky above the ridges looked crystalline and wide, its pale shimmer unbroken for once. The world seemed to breathe without tension. Kai stepped outside, hands dusted with dry clay, a smear of white across his forearm. He squinted against the brightness and lifted his face, letting the cold kiss his skin. The air didn't bite like it used to. Maybe it was the weather. Maybe it was her. The door behind him whispered open. Lyra stepped out, wrapping her arms around herself, her long amber hair tied loosely back, wisps catching in the light like spun gold. She blinked at the brightness and gave a quiet hum of surprise, the sound soft, barely more than a vibration. But Kai heard it, felt it in his chest. It's beautiful, she said. He turned toward her, lips tilting. I was starting to think you'd never say that word. I've thought it many times. But this time it's out loud. She met his eyes. This time, it's for you. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of what they'd survived, of everything they hadn't said because they didn't need to. He reached out and she took his hand easily, now no hesitation, their fingers lacing like they'd always belonged that way. "I want to show you something," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "More stone, less stone. More foolishness." That made her smile, the corners of her mouth curling upward like they'd just remembered how. He led her down a short path, past the storage shed now reinforced with fresh panels, and up toward the higher ridge overlooking the valley. The snow was softer here, half melted in places by concentrated sunlight and thermal vents. They stepped carefully but not cautiously. She trusted the ground now. And him. When they reached the rise, he stopped. At first, she didn't see it. Then she did. A tiny table, 2 uneven chairs, and a slab of polished stone carved flat with 2 cups sitting on top. A picnic. Her breath caught. Kai scratched the back of his neck. "I found some preserved fruit packs in the supply depot. Managed to trade for them with a carved medallion. It's not much, but it's everything," she said. They sat together, shoulders brushing, fingers still entwined as they ate. The food was ordinary, but the quiet joy that settled between them, that was rare. At one point, Lyra leaned her head against his arm and he turned slightly toward her. She tilted her chin up, expectant but unhurried. Her eyes, pale and endless, held his completely. "Say it," she whispered. He blinked. What you've been carrying. I hear it in your breath sometimes." He hesitated, then gave it voice. "I never thought I could be close to anyone again. I thought I'd ruin it. Like before. Like always." "You haven't," she said simply. "You've built something with me." She brought her other hand up to his jaw and brushed the side of his face with her thumb. His skin was rough, warm from the sun, and dusted with the faintest sheen of clay. She smiled. "Faintly? You always smell like stone. Is that good?" "It is now." Then she leaned in. Their lips met, soft at first, then deeper. There was no hunger in it, no fear. Just warmth, familiar, claimed. Her hands moved slowly to his collar and he pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her waist, holding her as if the wind might remember to return and try to take her again. But it didn't. And she didn't pull away. When they parted, their foreheads touched, breath to breath. She let out a small laugh, breathy and surprised. "That," she whispered, "felt like home." He kissed her again, lighter this time. "You are," he said. Later, as the light began to bend toward dusk, they carved their initials, his in simple block. Letters, hers in fluid curves, into the edge of the table. Not for show, not for proof. Just to say, we were here. And when the first stars blinked open above the snow-wrapped ridges, Kai pulled the blanket around them both and Lyra laid her head on his shoulder. They didn't speak again that night. They didn't need to. Some stories ended in silence, not because there was nothing left to say, but because at last nothing needed to be said.